All right, and we are live with a SeedPod podcast, episode 4.
Caught me by surprise.
Are we 4?
Huh?
Are we episode 4?
I think we are.
We are episode 4. And once again, we're doing all these daily Bible readings, so sometimes trying to keep track of what episode we're on. But today's comes from one of our listeners, one of our members here.
I'm actually paying attention to you.
Yeah, I know.
This caught me by surprise.
I know.
I'm back now.
I went live before he was ready.
It's okay.
I've done that before.
You have.
You know.
But that's okay.
That's okay. But we are going to be in John 4.
One time it wasn't okay.
No, yeah.
But
no,
we won't
talk about that time. We are in John 4, and the question comes, what does it mean to worship in spirit and truth?
Okay.
And I think that's a good question.
I think it's a very good question.
Because if Jesus asked us to do something a certain way,
We should do it.
we want to figure out how to do it.
And there are different layers to this.
Oh, yeah.
There's the layer of what he's talking about to the woman at the well. There's sort of the philosophical layer of it.
Yep.
There's how John ties things together and to bigger concerns. So there's more than one way of looking at it, yet there are ways of looking at it.
Well, and that real quick, I want to make a note about how we read our Bibles and when we're reading the Bible. One, the Bible's not written to us, it's for us.
Exactly.
And like right here, here's a perfect example. Jesus is speaking to a Samaritan woman.
We're not Samaritan.
Okay.
We don't live back then, and we're not there with him.
So there's something that he says to her that she's supposed to understand based upon what she knows, her experience, and what Jesus knows about her. Then there's also why is John recording this?
Yes, for posterity.
And how does he, because there's a lot of, John even tells us, there's a lot of things I could have written, but I've written these things for a specific person so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God.
Which is another thing, if I may.
Go ahead, you may. It's our podcast.
It is. The purpose of John's writing and the gospel is to convict people that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Huh. At that point, inquiry comes in. And like on Pentecost, what do?
Yeah.
What do we need to do? So our main thing is to convict people that Jesus is the Christ, he's the Son of the living God, he is the sacrifice for their sins, which they have, and they need him. Then we can get to the rest of the stuff.
So you're saying the way John presents Jesus, in the sense of just letting people come to Jesus, meet Jesus, know Jesus, that within itself is preaching the gospel?
He doesn't say, and when you come to that point, let me tell you what you need to do.
Yeah.
Because if you come to that point, you've obviously had an encounter with the gospel.
Yeah.
And you're able to pursue what the response will be.
Yeah. So with that in mind, John's context being so that you may believe. So we have to take what John says, why he's writing, into this, why he's writing.
Yes.
He wrote this story for us and recorded the things this way in this context so that we may believe in Jesus.
Yes, it's the gospel of belief. Call that for a reason.
Yes. So for those who don't know what's going on in John 4, I guess we should kind of catch people up. Because our audience could be...
Who knows?
What level of understanding, and how long has it been since they've read John?
Well, there's that too.
What John has been doing is showing that Jesus first is God. Yes. Starts off in John chapter 1, that he's the Word was with God, the Word was God, right, in the beginning.
And the Word became flesh.
This Word became flesh, and he brought grace and truth. Something Moses couldn't do. Yeah, yes. Something nobody else could do but Jesus, because he is truth defined. Truth is not just something Jesus says, it's who Jesus is.
He is. He is the personification.
He is truth. Okay? So then we get to chapter 2, where it's kind of the introduction into John's introduction into Jesus' ministry, and he turns water to wine. And we know...
Messianic sign.
We know it's a messianic sign that the kingdom is coming. The kingdom has come.
He's the Messiah.
He's the Messiah, and Zechariah tells us that it would be of new wine. He's cleansed the temple, which is significant because... of what?
He is the temple.
He is the temple.
Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I'll build it up.
He is the temple. He hits Nicodemus, John 3, talking about new life, that this life was going to be something even though he was a Jew born into, he was going to have to be born into again.
Yeah, there's something else going on you need to pick up on.
And that goes all the way back to John chapter 1, where it says he gave everybody, even those who
believed him,
that they could have the opportunity to be called to be called the sons of God. And so that's what John's been doing. Once again, it's all about Jesus. And now we come to a Samaritan woman who, by the way, Jesus is going to point out, is in sin. Doesn't have the cleanest of lives.
If I'm there, I'm looking at this woman, and I'm thinking, well, she's a Samaritan, she's a woman.
Jewish perspective.
I don't want to catch her eye or anything like that.
Yeah.
If I find out, I'm certainly not going to want to use her bucket because, goodness, I'm too pure for that. And if I know she's had 5 husbands and living with a guy, I really don't want to have anything to do with her. Yeah. That's what I'm seeing. What did Jesus see? A lost soul.
Yeah. Well, and there's, this is a side note, once again, but all this context will help you better understand what Jesus says to her. There's 2 ways of looking at it. You can either see, and this is something we have to talk about when we talk about our marriage discussions, is the fact that women could not divorce men. Men divorced women. Most of the time, it was a man giving a woman the right.
Yes.
And so a lot of times we look at her and her going from husband to husband to husband to husband. And Jesus could be saying, hey, I know your sins. Or it could be the fact that she's being passed around the way that Moses, why he wrote the certificate of divorce, so she couldn't be passed around like this. And Jesus saying, I know your struggles.
She's a victim.
Yeah.
But her culture would have seen her as even though she was a victim.
And even sometimes we do that, right? We talk about a man and a woman can get together before being married. They do the same act. A man, we kind of have this. Women, and we shame, right?
Yeah.
It's the shame guilt culture.
Sowing their wild oats.
It's always been around.
Yes.
So Jesus meets her. They have a very stark conversation because he's a Jewish man. She's a Samaritan woman. What do you have to do with me?
When he says, give me a drink,
yeah.
Those of us who were alive and well during the days of separate water fountains, he's basically, imagine this scenario. He's the white guy, she's the black person. She's got the drinking fountain. She's got the bucket. He said, I want to drink of your bucket. Well, you don't do, you don't do You're a Jew. You're asking me that. What do you mean?
Yeah. And so here's what he says. Verse 13. Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So where's our context? Our context is eternal life. Our context is something Jesus has to offer.
Always his end game.
Always his end game. And then she comes with a question. We're going to skip the husband thing for a second, but she's recognizing something about him. And the woman,
knows stuff.
He knows stuff. And the woman said, verse 19, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Still doesn't know he's the Messiah yet.
No.
But he knows stuff. And he's speaking like a prophet would speak.
He's got unusual knowledge.
And prophets got some weird, weird statements. Go read your Old Testament. Prophets are weird guys, right? And the way they word things. So, our fathers worshipped on this mountain. Gerizim,
Gerizim, the Mount of Blessings as opposed to cursings.
Yeah, which is a good mountain.
Yeah, if you're going to choose a mountain in a Samaritan area, that's one you want to choose.
That's a good mountain. And at one time, it was the mountain that God was going to use, and he decided, it seems as if God all of a sudden changes and goes to Jerusalem, right?
The place where you choose for. David had to even conquer the city before he could do that.
Yeah. So there's an argument, age-old argument, which mountain?
Who's right?
Jesus is going to answer the question.
For the right now.
Yeah, for the right now.
But he's going to answer it for the later too.
And so this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem you will worship the Father. Basically saying all your concerns and all the Jewish and Samaritan arguments and all those things, they may concern you now, but they're not going to concern you
eventually,
soon.
We're not going to be having that discussion.
That's the nature of the kingdom.
And by the way, for right now, having that discussion, the Jews are right.
Yeah, the Jews are right. And that's what he says. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. I think there's a dual thing there. Salvation is from the Jews, not just speaking of the mountain, but the Jews had the promise, the child of promise right.
Yes.
That the Messiah would come through Judah, and Judah was one of the southern tribes that were still...
Yes, they're still around.
So Jesus, I think, is using a play off. You're talking about mountains, salvation from the Jews. I'm salvation. right? I give living water.
That's always the thing, like temple or whatever.
Yeah.
He is it. Truth. He is it.
He
So
is
we're going to
it.
deal with where we are. We're going to deal with some other things, but
Yeah.
the end game of all of this is Jesus is it.
Yeah, so verse 23, but the hour is coming, and this is where the question comes from, is 23 and 24. The hour is coming, is now here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. And I want to read the next verse because it's important. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth.
So if you're going to worship God, in a credible, acceptable way, this has to be part of it, no matter when you're talking about it.
Yeah. Yep. And once again, getting back to how we study the Bible, contextually, first and foremost, spirit and truth is tied up in who Jesus is. And John is going to use this. First, he is the truth. He is the Logos, right? The Logos, however you pronounce it.
Who knows?
And then later in John 7, he's going to talk about this water again, this living water.
Yeah, it comes back.
And about how it's a spirit that he is going to send, that he hasn't sent yet, but that it's originating. He's the progenitor of this spirit.
Who, by the way, is associated with truth in a huge way.
Absolutely.
All truth are going to come through that.
So Jesus, once again, in mountains, what are the significance of mountains when it comes to worship?
High places, and people consider that to be holier territory.
And what was built normally on mountains?
Well, you've got temple, you've got worship places
Altars
of one sort or
and-
another. There was an alternative temple that was on Mount Gerizim at times, altars, that kind of thing. It was just the way business was done.
Yeah, so when you think of mountain, they're not just saying, hey, this dirt, I own this dirt.
Not talking about the valley, we're talking about the mountain.
Yeah, and we're talking about a place of worship, where you go to meet the gods, right, or God in this case. And so Jesus is essentially saying, him then going saying, I'm the Messiah, right? I am he. I know you know the Messiah is coming. That you're going to worship God as spirit. And John's entire gospel is written that you may know that Jesus is the Son of God,
the Son of the living God,
which means he is God. He is also spirit. So when you're worshiping in him and you're in his kingdom,
you got it.
It is not a physical, physical walls. As Zechariah would say, God says, I'll be your walls. You don't need physical walls. You don't need a physical city anymore. It will be something that is expanding. It's growing.
Take up the whole world.
Take up the whole world.
One thing, going back to the moment, if you
Yeah.
will, and the practical aspect of it for the moment, he's letting the lady know, in one sense, it doesn't matter how much your spirit is wanting to do this, how intense you are, how you got your whole self into it, everything else. If it doesn't have to be by the truth, it doesn't count. You could do the same thing. You may have a truth down, bam, 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 but it's not in here.
Yeah.
It's just something you use to justify yourself or to come out against others. You don't have the right spirit. You got to get some things together.
I do find this funny because normally when Jesus is speaking about the Jews and what they've brought into the world currently, it's usually in the negative.
Yeah, they haven't done well.
They haven't done well. And here he says salvation's from the Jews. See, they had the truth,
It is.
but look at how they treated a Samaritan woman.
The name of God was blasphemed among the Gentiles by the Jews.
So
behavior.
you almost kind of see it in the practical application. She's got the spirit. She's got I'm just waiting for the Messiah.
Yeah,
She's got the right intentions, a good heart.
Comes up and,
The Jews got the truth, right? Where they from their mountain, they've got the law of Moses.
We got it.
But their spirit
It becomes legalistic in the
Yes.
bad sense of that term.
bring the Samaritan woman and the Jews, both they're good, and bring them together.
What if she accepted that Jewish Messiah? That'd be pretty good. Wouldn't it?
Yeah, and in this new kingdom, everybody who's going to be a part of it will choose and become a part of it through their heart, through the truth, and ultimately Jesus is the access point
Yes.
for all of that.
And although we're talking about worship here, because she
Yeah.
asked that question,
Yep.
all worship is service, but not all service is worship. So we're actually talking about any expression that we're offering to God, be it worship or whatever.
Yeah.
It has to have these credentials associated with it.
Yeah, but well, and that's now we're getting to kind of how should we read this as Christians looking on this side of it? Obviously, it's not written to us, but it is written for us. And so, because a lot of times we go to this and we ask the first, well, spirit and truth. He's talking about Sunday morning worship, right? Well, this has no context right here immediately.
No, nobody's going to think about that then. Now, you come to this point and you say, is there anything there that talks about this? Well, yeah. But that's not, he's got a much broader, if you will, philosophical interest. This is about everything.
Yeah. And so, but I think if we get that first context first.
Yeah.
That
when
is
we
Jesus.
go out the building, we're still supposed to be spirit and truth. Are you saying that?
Yep.
Man.
Everywhere we go, we are to be worshiping or living in spirit and in truth. And Jesus, we don't just meet God here, right? That's his point. You're not going to go to a location anymore to meet God.
He's in us, and we're in him.
And it goes back to the difference between the temple and the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a moving thing.
It moved with the folks.
It moved with the folks. And how much better would that have served them if they would have just allowed that to kind of be there? But they wanted that temple.
Yeah.
Right?
They wouldn't have it.
They wanted it, and it became a symbol.
Give us a king like everybody else. All kind of things they want.
And this building, if we're not careful, a church building, can become an idol within itself, can it?
It can.
We almost act as if this is the very presence of God.
What we do is holy, but what we do, down at Walmart, by living sanctified lives in the Christ to show our light to the world, that's holy stuff too.
Yeah. So, Jesus will later, in John 14, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. My truth will set you free. The truth about who I am and the truth that I'm giving you of how to follow me.
There are commandments.
Yeah, there are commandments.
That you will keep out of a motivation of love for God.
Yeah, and that's where all this is coming together. So when we're speaking about worshiping in spirit and truth, we're talking about taking the words of Jesus, taking the words of Scripture, not only just head knowledge, checklist stuff, right? Figuring out, Jesus is the Messiah, of course. I can add 1 + 1 = 2. Right?
Now, does that mean you have any trust in that? Any conviction about that? Any desire to do anything with it? Not necessarily.
Yeah. And I love that the God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So God is spirit. Is God in one location? Is God a physical thing in which you can take or move or build? As Paul would say, is God made? Does God dwell in temples made by human hands?
Told the Athenians, he's near to everybody. Yeah,
he's near to everybody. And so this kind of gets back to a discussion that we were having last night in one of our Bible classes. There's this expression, I want Jesus but not the church. Right? And what we've done is we've separated Jesus and the church from each other, when really the truth about Jesus is the truth about the church, which is the truth about worship, which is the truth about our life. So Jesus is this total package of truth.
And here's the problem, and we've talked about this, and that is what some people see that calls itself church, what some people see that calls itself Christianity, doesn't mean that's what it is. And so some people put off by not good expressions of church, don't want anything to do with it. They want Jesus. That said, that often gets to be more emotional than anything else. But just to that, the church is supposed to look like Jesus, and Jesus like the church. There's supposed to be a congruency, and they fit.
Yep. Well, getting back to that, Jesus is the ultimate temple, and that's what John's been establishing. And since he's the temple that is dwelling on the mountain, and he's the mountain, he becomes the place where we meet God. He becomes, as you have in here, what we're going to be looking at, is the ultimate image bearer. He is what the image bearers ought to look like.
We're supposed to be image bearers, but what does that look like in the ultimate sense? It looks like Jesus.
It looks like Jesus, which is spirit and truth, right? And so, we can get so caught up in trying to figure out, well, truth, is it 5 acts of worship? Is it 5 acts of this? Is it 5 this? Is he just speaking about worship? Because a lot of people go here and be like, well, this is just Sunday morning stuff. This can't be.
It has to be bigger than that.
Has to be bigger than that.
If you isolate it, it loses part of its context that it needs to be what it needs to be.
So your life, whether it's service or worship or following Jesus, needs to entail all of Christ's likeness.
If you don't bring that life into a church building to worship, you're not worshiping.
Yeah. Well, it's like dead faith. James talks about this dead faith that has no works. It has nothing that goes along with it, right? If you see a person who's in need and you say,
they may be going to a church building all the time, but if you see it's not congruent with the bigger picture, what goes on in that building, it doesn't count.
Well, and that's really the Jewish issue. They had the right mountain They had the temple.
They had the things they went through in their feast.
They did all the feasts. They did all the sacrifices.
Unclean animals.
And God would tell them over and over and over again, it's better to obey and not sacrifice, or it's better to have loyalty and not sacrifice.
Malachi says, just close the door so you can't go in there and do that foolishness.
Jesus, in our Matthew study, in our daily Bible readings, he says, go and learn what this means, that I desire mercy, justice, and
It's
compassion.
not that they hadn't heard the words before.
Is look what it means. And that's really kind of some of the essence. It's not just being able to tell me what it says, but has it changed you from the inside out?
Yeah. Are you speaking from yourself, your transformed self, or are you just speaking words?
Well, and then if we continue with the context, if context determines meaning, how does this change the Samaritan woman?
Profoundly.
What does she do with her water bucket?
Which was awfully important to her at the beginning. It doesn't mean a thing in the world now.
Oh.
Sort of, you get carried away there. You deny yourself. First, and Jesus will get into this. They come back, I have food to eat that you don't know about. My food is to do the will of him who sent me. There's something more important than the physical things of life. They're important, obviously. That bucket was a physical thing. She found out about some living water. That opportunity to teach a person, a soul, about God was more important to Jesus than eating a meal. And so he would wait a while to eat so he could take care of business for God.
So this is just kind of hitting me. He's taken three major physical attributes, a well, which is not just for nourishment, but also for, I mean, you would have used that for all sorts of things, water, a mountain where you used to worship, physical thing, and food, and said
He's
all
a
of
living
these,
bread. He's a bread come down out of heaven.
All of these things only has a physical component, and if you only look at the physical component of all these things, you've missed the spiritual component, in which I'm the living water, I am the mountain, right? I am the place where you meet God. My food is to do the will of the Father. And if only we had that kind of mindset.
Then you can put mountains and wells and water and bread into their context.
Yeah. Seek first the kingdom of God and all these
And
things.
things will be added to you.
Right? As, you know, Jesus will tell the Pharisees, you should have sought mercy, justice, and compassion without forgetting all these other things.
Tithe your seeds, but there are bigger fish to fry, and you're not frying them.
Yeah, because is Jesus going to drink more water later?
Yeah, of course he is.
Is he going to eat food?
Yes.
Is he going to go up on mountains?
Sure.
But are they important?
Is he going to go to the temple? Yes.
Yeah.
They're only important because of bigger things.
Yeah.
The bigger things taken away, they're just things.
Well, I mean, is there anything else you want to add to it?
A couple of things.
Okay.
I just blurt out a couple of scriptures and make a point. Exodus 35:21 and Proverbs 17:22. Hebrew parallelism. One line will say one thing, another will repeat the same thing. Heart and spirit, in this sense, are combined together in what they mean. Now, it isn't always the case, but what this is talking about, the essence of you.
Yeah.
Who you are as an image bearer of God. Your heart can sometimes be used to talk about the same thing. So if that helps understand a little bit, then okay. And he says in John 17:17, sanctify them in truth, your word is truth. So there is a chiseled out bottom line about truth. And that is, it is what God says. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. We're to be set apart. And that truth isn't just memorizing do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
There are do's and don'ts. It isn't just memorizing what to do in church building. There are things you're supposed to do in church building. That is saying that what we do has to take into account all of what the truth says.
Yeah.
And it talks about heart, it talks about love, it talks about all kinds of things as opposed to the start, do this, don't do that.
Well, and I like something that you say over and over and over again. Well, several things I like to say.
I'm hungry.
You know, no, this aspect of, you know, when you talk about church identity and you don't have Jesus as a part of the church identity, if you talk about worship and you don't have Jesus as the core central, you know, we talk about 5 acts. Well, what about Jesus? Where's Jesus in worship? You know, so we only tend to usually focus on our aspect, the human nature of what's going on with what we do. What about what's going on with God and what He's doing and what He's done? And it's just
what does He have to look at the church? I mean, does Jesus say, by this will all men know that you are my disciples? That sounds fairly churchy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you have love one for another, like the love He had for them. So I can talk about what I do in here.
Yeah.
And I can boil it down to, we do this, we don't do that, which has a place.
Yeah.
But if we're not getting that ground level, here's what Jesus says about the identity of his church. Here's what the builder of the church said would convict people. If we don't pay much attention to that, we're ignoring the fundamental aspect that he gave us.
Well, one, because Jesus, as you already pointed out, says, I've come to do the will of my Father. And if he's doing the will of his Father, and that's what I don't understand. Sometimes when you're talking about people, it's like, I know what it says, but if Jesus can humble himself to the point of becoming a man to do the will of the Father, then the fact that people say, well, I don't really need to, are you saying you're better than Jesus?
That's kind of presumptuous.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's, overall, if there's nothing else that you have, when you're thinking of all these things, spirit and truth, first look at the immediate context of what's going on.
Understand that God has made you in his image.
Yeah.
And that you are to approach him and deal with him with that image.
Yeah.
That level. Not just your flesh and not just outward things that you do. You're in there. You've bought into it. Y'all are communicating spirit to spirit. And there's a guidance that he has given for that communication, which is the truth.
Yeah. So like even when you're singing, if you're singing and you don't know the words, you're not internalizing the words.
We're supposed to be teaching if we don't know what they say.
Well, Colossians even talks about let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. And then when you sing, it's the word of Christ is bubbling out.
We had a lady in the auditorium class that's not visiting with us who said one of the things that helps her going about as we're going talking to people about Jesus, she says, I try to get into the Word a lot because the more I'm in it, the more it's in me and the more it wants to come out.
Yeah, and she says it's at the forefront of her mind, right? It means she's always thinking about it. And unfortunately, a lot of times,
Jesus did that.
Why we don't know what to do in given situations and don't have immediately when something hits us is because we just don't know what it says, right? We're empty.
Jesus is as he's going, but he's got his radar on. How can I use what I am, consequently what I know, to address this person for the good of these people created in the image of God? That is his food.
You know what I find, last point for me at least, the Samaritan woman was waiting and expecting for this Messiah. So when he came and when he started doing these things, it didn't take her very long for him to go from man to prophet to Messiah. Not very long at all, because she was expecting it. She knew the scriptures. He had already done some things to prove that about himself. And when he says, I am he, light bulb.
Bam.
But unfortunately,
she's ready to go.
We miss a lot of light bulbs because we don't have the connections going up to the light bulb.
No, even though she's a Samaritan, she knows her Old Testament.
Oh yeah, probably better than we do.
Oh, I suspect so, unfortunately. So he's talking stuff to her that she's not foreign to.
Yeah, and I just have to say, I know I keep saying last point, she goes and tells her whole city about this.
And they listen to her.
Yeah.
They're not giving her the time of day, but she's changed. It's infectious. When you find a relationship with God that's genuine, your whole demeanor is different.
Yeah, you see the Spirit and truth living in her. She took that and immediately took that to heart.
She's a different woman.
She's a different woman. So,
there we go.
There we go. That's to worship in spirit and truth, and there's a lot of nuances you can get into, and that's not really our point. Our point is to first, what does it mean here? What are some ways we can apply it? And one of the things about the SeedPod is we're just planting seeds so that you can take these thoughts and take them hopefully further than we can do.
We're not the final answer.
We are not the final answer, and we won't claim to be the final answer. We'll just give you what comes to our head.
Check it out.
Check it out. And if you have further questions, this would be a good time to ask, and then we can take those specific
and bring them back up.
So we love you.
Yes, we do.
We appreciate you. God bless.